Hello, and welcome to my podcast. My name is Ralph Clayton, and I am your host. Sit back and relax. This is episode 1 of a series about something I've been working on for a long time, called the Volumetric Time Model, or VTM. The subtitle of the book is Why the Future Feels Decided. And that is exactly what we are going to unpack. Before we get into physics or philosophy, I want to start with a feeling you've probably had. You wake up, you check your phone, you scroll a bit, and there is this weird sense that the day is already written. Not in a mystical way, in a mechanical way. Like you are already late to your own life. Like decisions are happening around you faster than you can touch them. Like you can predict what's coming, but you cannot steer it. You can see the wave, but you can't move the ocean. That feeling is not just anxiety. It might be pointing at something real about how time, information, and agency work. VTM is my attempt to give that feeling a clean, rational explanation, not with vague motivational talk, not with spiritual fog, with a framework that combines physics intuition, information theory, and a practical view of what it means to act in a world where access is limited. So today, in episode 1, I'm going to do 4 things. First, I'll introduce myself and explain why I'm even talking about this. Second, I'll give you a simple version of what the volumetric time model is, without making you do math. Third, I'll explain the key idea that sits underneath everything, which is the difference between existence and access. And fourth, I'll show you why this matters for real life, for responsibility, for prediction, for AI, for the way modern systems feel, and for why the future can feel decided, even when you don't know it. Then we'll close with what episode 2 is going to cover. If you are here for hard science, don't worry. We will get more technical later in the series. If you are here because you want clarity and you do not want jargon, you're also in the right place. I wrote VTM for general readers. The goal is simple language, strong intuition, and a model that holds together. All right? Quick personal intro. I'm Ralph. I write about physics, science, philosophy, and computer science, especially where they overlap. My obsession is the boundary between what is true in a universe and what a real observer can actually know or use. Because that boundary is where most of our confusion comes from. People argue about free will, or determinism, or prediction, as if we are gods, watching the whole timeline. We are not. We are limited systems running inside the system, with latency, noise, memory constraints, and incomplete data. And the moment you take that seriously, a lot of the classic arguments change shape. I also care about this because modern life is basically an experience of delayed feedback. You send messages, you refresh pages, you wait for approvals, you get filtered. You live inside invisible pipelines. It affects how you think, how you decide, how you feel. And most of the time, you can't even name what is happening, which makes you blame yourself. VTM is partly a physics model, but it's also a vocabulary for a modern experience. Now, before I define VTM, let me plant a flag. This is not a claim that you can see the future. This is not a claim that you can access future facts. This is not some magic prediction system. It's almost the opposite. It's a model that says reality can be consistent and fixed in a deep sense, while your access to it is limited, delayed, and filtered. That means the future can be there in the structure, while you can still be genuinely uncertain inside your limited viewpoint. Your uncertainty is not fake. Your lived experience of choice is not fake. It is a product of limited access. And that is the heart of it. Okay, let's define the volumetric time model in one sentence. VTM says that the universe can be understood as a four-dimensional volume of events, like a complete space-time object, and what we call the present is not a universal moving spotlight. It is a local access boundary shaped by information flow, latency, and the limits of observers. That sentence is doing a lot, so let's unpack it slowly. Most people have an image of time as a line. The past behind you, the future in front of you, and you are a little dot moving forward. That's a useful mental picture for daily life. But physics has been quietly telling us for a long time that the dot moving picture is not fundamental. Relativity already makes now complicated. Two observers moving relative to each other do not agree on what is happening right now at distant locations. That is not a philosophical debate. It is a consequence of how space and time mix. So if now is not globally agreed, then the idea of a universal present slicing through the universe starts to look like a convenience, not a law. A different picture is called the block universe picture. In that picture, the universe is a whole four-dimensional structure. Past, present, and future are all part of the structure, not as a prediction, but as a geometrical object. VTM takes that picture seriously, but it adds an important operational twist. Even if the full space-time structure exists, no observer has full access to it. You are not standing outside the block. You are inside it. You only access information through causal channels. Light cones, signals, memory, measurement. Everything is constrained. So your experience of uncertainty is not an illusion. It is the natural consequence of being a limited system inside the volume. So, in VTM, We separate two things. One is existence. The structure exists as a whole. The second is operational accessibility. What can you actually access in time to matter, given the constraints of information flow? And that split is where most confusion dies. Let me give you a simple analogy. Imagine a huge library. The library contains every page of a very long story. The whole story exists in the library. But you are not allowed to roam freely. You are in a narrow hallway with a small lamp. You can only read the pages that the lamp illuminates. You can turn your head. You can move slowly. You can remember what you read. But you cannot jump to the end and read the last chapter instantly. In that analogy, the library is existence. The lamp and the hallway are access. Your uncertainty about what's next is real. Because from your position, you cannot read ahead. But the story still exists as an object. Both things can be true at once. That's the core move. Now, the obvious reaction is, oak. So you are saying determinism. And this is where we have to be precise. Because people confuse determinism with predictability, and they are not the same. Determinism, in the simplest sense, is a statement about the structure of the laws. It says that given a complete state and the laws, the evolution is fixed. Predictability is about an agent's ability to infer outcomes from limited information, with limited compute, under noise, with imperfect models. A system can be deterministic and still be unpredictable for real agents. Chaos is the classic example. Tiny differences in initial conditions explode. So even a deterministic system can be practically unpredictable. On the other side, a system can have randomness at a fundamental level and still be predictable in aggregate. You can predict statistical patterns without predicting individual outcomes. So when I talk about the block universe or the space-time volume, I'm not making a cheap claim like everything is predetermined, so nothing matters. I'm saying that there can be global consistency, while local agents still experience uncertainty, and that uncertainty is grounded in access limits, not mystical freedom, which leads to the next big thing: agency. In VTM, agency is not a magical property. It is not metaphysical. Agency is operational. It is the measurable ability of an agent to influence future states through actions within a horizon where influence is still detectable. You can think of it like this. If you make a choice, does that choice change what happens later in a way that can be detected above noise? If yes, you have agency in that region. If no, you might still have thoughts and feelings and plans, but operationally your influence is below the threshold. And that is incredibly important, because it gives us a way to talk about free will. without falling into a religious war. Free will, in this framing, becomes a question about access and influence, not about metaphysical escape from physics. Now let me pause and make it personal again. The reason the future feels decided in modern life is often because your agency horizon is shrinking, not because the universe hates you, because your feedback loops are delayed, your actions are diluted by scale, and the systems you interact with are built to be stable, not responsive to individuals. You can predict outcomes, you can see patterns, but you cannot steer them, and that can feel like fate. VTM gives a clean explanation of that feeling. It says your experience is consistent with a world where global history is coherent, but your local influence is constrained. Okay, so what does volumetric mean here? It means we treat time not as a flowing river you ride, but as a dimension in the volume. Your experience is like a traversal of a world line inside that volume. But the present moment is not a universal slice. It is the set of events you can access. Given your physical situation and information channels, your present is an interface, not a cosmic truth. And because it is an interface, it can be distorted by latency, by noise, by filtering, by measurement limits, by attention, by social systems, by technology. So the now you experience is not just physics. It's also infrastructure. That's the bridge between physics and modern life. Now I want to talk about one concept that makes this click for people. Existence is not access. Say it again. Existence is not access. A thing can exist in the structure without being accessible to you. This is normal in physics. The far side of the moon existed before humans saw it. Distant galaxies exist, even if their light hasn't reached us. Events behind a black hole horizon might exist, but not be accessible to outside observers. So it's not crazy. What's crazy is that we forget this distinction when we talk about time. We speak as if the future does not exist yet, because we cannot access it. But that is a jump. That is confusing your access limits with reality's structure. VTM refuses that jump. Now, you might ask, okay, but what about quantum mechanics? That's where people get nervous. Here is the clean way I handle it in this series. Quantum mechanics gives us uncertainty, probabilities, and measurement outcomes that are not predictable in detail. But even there are different interpretations. Some are more block, universe, friendly than others. My goal in VTM is not to force one interpretation down your throat. My goal is to show you that uncertainty can be understood as a feature of limited access, and that global consistency can still hold. We will do a full episode later, just on quantum issues, interpretations, and what VTM does and does not claim. For episode 1, keep it simple. Even if the universe is globally consistent, you can still have real uncertainty locally. Your brain is not reading the future. Your brain is doing Bayesian updating. It is receiving signals, updating beliefs, predicting likely outcomes, and acting under constraints. That is enough to explain lived uncertainty and decision-making. So VTM is compatible with the reality of not knowing. Now let's make this practical. Why should anyone care? Because the way you interpret time changes, how you interpret responsibility. Classic moral thinking often assumes something like this. If the outcome happened, you should have known it. Or, if it was predictable in principle, you should be blamed for not predicting it. But VTM says, no. Responsibility must track operational access. What information did the agent actually have in time to matter? What was the latency? What was the noise? What were the constraints? What feedback was available? If you punish people for what they could not access, you are not doing justice. You are doing hindsight theater. And on the flip side, if there are systems that control feedback, timing, and access, those systems carry responsibility because they control the shape of agency. This has implications for law, for accountability, for workplace systems, for platform decisions, for AI tools, for anything where people act under constrained information. And it gives you a way to talk about harm that does not rely on moral shouting. Delayed feedback is a form of agency removal. Extreme opacity is a form of agency removal. Confusing interfaces are a form of agency removal. If you can't see consequences, you can't steer. If you can't steer, you're just being moved. That is not spiritual. That is mechanical. Okay. Let's connect this to one more idea that I think is going to resonate. Prediction without power. This is a theme that comes up a lot in my work. You can have situations where you can forecast outcomes statistically, but you cannot influence them. You can see the failure coming, but you cannot stop it. You can watch the pattern, but you cannot change the trajectory. This happens in finance, in health, in relationships, in platform systems, in large organizations, in social dynamics. And it is psychologically brutal, because humans naturally link prediction with control. We think if we see it, we can do something. But sometimes you can't. In VTM language, you are beyond your agency horizon for that outcome. Influence is below threshold. So, what do you do then? That's an episode by itself, but I'll give you a preview. You stop confusing prediction with power. You stop punishing yourself for not doing the impossible. You look for levers that are actually within your horizon. You reduce latency. You improve feedback. You change the coupling, the real link between your actions and outcomes. Sometimes that means changing behavior. Sometimes it means changing the environment. Sometimes it means admitting an outcome is outside your influence and choosing how to relate to it. This is not surrender. It is precision. Okay. Let's ground VTM even more with a simple thought experiment. Imagine you are driving a car with a steering wheel that has a 2-second delay. You turn the wheel, and the car responds 2 seconds later. Can you drive? Yes, but it's harder. Now imagine a 10-second delay. You can still predict what the car will do, but your steering becomes unstable. You overcorrect. You undercorrect. You start to feel like the car has a mind of its own. Now imagine the delay gets so long that the car reacts to your steering when you're already in a different situation. Your steering is no longer coupled to the current state. At that point, your influence is effectively gone. You can still turn the wheel, but it doesn't map to control. It's just motion. That is what shrinking agency feels like. Modern life is full of delayed steering wheels. And VTM says, the feeling that the future is decided is often the feeling of delayed coupling. Now, one more important clarification. VTM is not pessimistic. It's not trying to convince you that nothing matters. It's trying to tell you exactly what matters and where. It says your meaning and your responsibility live within your operational horizon, not in cosmic fantasies, not in metaphysical arguments. In the region where your actions couple to outcomes above noise. And that can actually be empowering, because it strips away fake guilt and fake pride. You are not responsible for everything, but you are responsible for what you can actually influence. And if you want more influence, you don't pray for freedom. You engineer better feedback loops. That's the point. Okay. Let's zoom out and talk about the structure of this podcast series. Episode 1 is the foundation. What is VTM? Why it exists? The difference between existence and access, and why the future can feel decided. Episode 2 will go deeper into the core mechanics. What counts as access? In physical terms, how signals and causality define your local present, and how a brain actually behaves as a predictive system under constraints. We'll also talk about why people get stuck in loops when feedback is delayed, and how that creates the sensation of inevitability. Episode 3 will take on free will head-on, but in a way that doesn't turn into a shouting match. We'll define agency as measurable influence and talk about the agency horizon. We'll also cover what it means to be aligned with a future without having leverage over it, which is a concept that shows up in both human life and AI. Later episodes will handle quantum interpretations carefully and will also address ethics, responsibility, and what VTM implies for technology, AI systems, and modern governance without turning the whole thing into politics. Now I want to end episode 1 with a tight summary, because you should feel like you got something solid. Here it is. VTM proposes that reality can be treated as a space-time volume, a coherent structure. While your lived experience is constrained by operational access, your present moment is not a universal slice. It's the boundary of what information you can access. Your uncertainty is real, because your access is limited. Your agency is real where your actions influence outcomes above noise. The feeling that the future is decided often comes from shrinking agency horizons due to latency, noise, and filtered feedback, not from mystical fate. And the practical message is not despair. It's clarity. Stop confusing prediction with power. Stop confusing existence with access. Stop blaming yourself for outcomes outside your operational horizon. Focus on real levers, real coupling, real feedback. And if you want to expand your agency, don't argue metaphysics. Improve the signal. Reduce the delay, change the environment, and build systems that give you usable feedback. That is episode 1. In episode 2, we go straight into the machinery. What is access? What is a horizon? How does information flow define your lived? No. And why does the brain's predictive nature make the future feel present, even when it's not accessible? If you want to follow along, you can check out the book, The Volumetric Time Model. Why the future feels decided, but you don't need it. This series is designed to stand on its own. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this, subscribe and send it to someone who always says, I knew it would end like this, but can't explain why. I'm Ralph Clayton, and this was podcast number 1, the VTM model. See you soon, fellow explorers. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, by any means, check out my books. They are interesting and highly recommended. Bye.